Welcome to the Joyful House and welcome to this episode of Once Upon a Story Time. Today we are continuing the Anna Green Gables book series. We are currently in book number 5, Anne's House of Dreams. And today we are going to continue with 2 chapters. We're going to look at chapter 34, The Ship of Dreams Comes to Harbor. And we're going to look at chapter 35, Politics at Four Winds. So if you're ready, sit back, let's relax and enjoy this storybook adventure. Chapter 34, The Ship of Dreams Comes to Harbor. One morning, when a windy golden sunrise was billowing over the gulfs in waves of light, a certain weary stork flew over the bar of Four Winds Harbor on his way from the land of evening stars. Under his wing was tucked a sleepy, starry-eyed little creature. The stork was tired, and he looked wistfully about him. He knew he was somewhere near his destination, but he could not yet see it. The big white lighthouse on the red sandstone cliff had its good points, but no stork possessed of any gumption would leave a new velvet baby there. An old gray house surrounded by willows in a blossomy brook valley looked more promising, but did not seem quite the thing either. The starring green abode further on was manifestly out of the question. Then the stork brightened up. Had they caught sight of the very place? A little white house nestled against a big whispering firewood with a spiral of blue smoke winding up from its kitchen chimney. A house which just looked as if it were meant for babies. The stork gave a sigh of satisfaction and softly alighted on the ridgepole. Half an hour later, Gilbert ran down the hall and tapped on the spare room door. A drowsy voice answered him, and in a moment, Marilla's pale, scared face peeped up from behind the door. "Marilla, Anne has sent me to tell you that a certain young gentleman has arrived here. He hasn't brought much luggage with him, but he's evidently meant to stay." "For pity's sake," said Marilla blankly. "You don't mean to tell me, Gilbert, that it's all over. Why wasn't I called?" "Anne wouldn't let us disturb you when there was no need. Nobody was called until about 2 hours ago. There was no passage perilous this time." And Gilbert, will this baby live?" "He certainly will. He weighs 10 pounds and, why, listen to him. Nothing wrong with his lungs, is there? The nurse says his hair will be red. Anne is furious with her, and I am tickled to death." That was a wonderful day in the little house of dreams. The best dream of all has come true, said Anne, pale and rapturous. "Oh, Marilla, I hardly dare believe it. After that horrible day last summer, I have had a heartache ever since then, but it is now gone." "This baby will take Joy's place," said Marilla. "Oh, no, 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 Marilla. He can't. Nothing can ever do that. He has his own place, my dear wee man-child. But little Joy has hers, and always will have it. If she had lived, she would have been over a year old. She would have been toddling around on her tiny feet and lisping a few words. I can see her so plainly, Marilla. Oh, I know now that Captain Jim was right when he said God would manage better than my baby would seem a stranger to me when I found her beyond. I've learned that this past year. I have followed her development day by day and week by week. I always shall. I shall know just how she grows from year to year. And when I meet her again, I will know her. She won't be a stranger. Oh, Marilla, look at his dear, darling toes. Isn't it strange that they should be so perfect?" "It would be stranger if they weren't," said Marilla crisply. Now that all was safely over, Marilla was herself again. "Oh, I know, but it seems as if this couldn't be quite finished, you know. And there are even those tiny nails, and his hands. Just look at his hands, Marilla." "They appear to be a good deal like hands," Marilla conceded. "See how he clings to my finger? I'm sure he knows me already. He cries when the nurse takes him away. Oh, Marilla, do you think, you don't think, do you, that his hair is going to be red?" "I don't see much hair of any color," said Marilla. "I wouldn't worry about it if I were you, until it becomes visible." "Marilla, he has hair. Look at that fine little down all over his head. Anyway, Nurse says his eyes will be hazel and his forehead is exactly like Gilbert's. And he has the nicest little ears, Mrs. Doctor dear," said Susan. "The first thing I did was to look at his ears. Hair is deceitful, and noses and eyes change, but you cannot tell what is going to come. Hair is deceitful, and noses and eyes change, and you cannot tell what is going to come of them. But ears are from start to finish, and you always know where you are with them. Just look at their shape, and they are set right back against his precious head. You will never be ashamed of his ears, Mrs. Doctor dear." Anne's convalescence was rapid and happy. Folks came and worshipped the baby as people have bowed before the kingship of newborns since long before the wise men of the East knelt in homage to the royal babe of the Bethlehem manger. Leslie, slowly finding herself amid the new conditions of her life, hovered over it like a beautiful golden crowned Madonna. Miss Cornelia nursed it as knackily as could any mother in Israel. Captain Jim held the small creature in his own brown hands and gazed tenderly at it, with eyes that saw the children who'd never been born to him. "What are you going to call him?" asked Miss Cornelia. "Anne has settled his name," answered Gilbert. "James Matthew, after the two finest gentlemen I've ever known. Not even saving your presence," said Anne with a saucy glance at Gilbert. Gilbert smiled. "I never knew Matthew very well. He was so shy, we boys couldn't get acquainted with him. But I quite agree with you that Captain Jim is one of the rarest and finest souls God has ever clothed in clay. He is so delighted over the fact that we have given his name to our small lad. It seems he has no other namesake." "Well, James Matthew is a name that will wear well and not fade in the washing," said Miss Cornelia. "I'm glad you didn't load him down with some highfalutin romantic name that he'd be ashamed of when he gets to be a grandfather. Mrs. William Drew at the Glen has called her baby Bertie Shakespeare. Quite a combination, isn't it? And I'm glad you haven't had much trouble picking out a name. Some folks have an awful time. When the Stanley Flagg's first boy was born, there was so much rivalry as to who the child should be named for that the poor little soul had to go for 2 years without a name. Then a brother came along, and there it was, Big Baby and Little Baby. Finally, they called Big Baby Peter and Little Baby Isaac, after the two grandfathers, and had them both christened together, and each tried to see if he couldn't howl the other down. You know that Highland Scotch family of McNabbs back of the Glen? They've got 12 boys, and the oldest and the youngest are both called Neil. Big Neil and Little Neil in the same family. Well, I suppose they ran out of names." "I've read somewhere," laughed Anne, "that the first child is a poem, but the 10th is very prosy prose. Perhaps Mrs. McNabb thought that the 12th was merely an old tale retold." "Well, there's something to be said for large families," said Miss Cornelia with a sigh. "I was an only child for 8 years, and I did long for a brother and sister. Mother told me to pray for one, and pray I did, believe me. Well, one day Aunt Nellie came to me and said, 'Cornelia, there's a little brother for you upstairs in your ma's room. You can go up and see him.' I was so excited and delighted I just flew upstairs. And old Mrs. Flagg lifted up the baby for me to see. Lord, Ann dearie, I never was so disappointed in my life. You see, I'd been praying for a brother 2 years older than myself." "Well, how long did it take you to get over your disappointment?" asked Anne, amid her laughter. "Well, I had a spite of Providence for a good spell, and for weeks I couldn't even look at the baby. Nobody knew why, for I never told. Then he began to get real cute and held out his wee hands to me, and I began to get fond of him. But I didn't get really reconciled to him until one day a school chum came to see him and said she thought he was awful small for his age. I just got boiling mad, and I sailed right into her and told her she didn't know a nice baby when she saw one, and ours was the nicest baby in the world. And after that, I just worshipped him. Mother died before he was 3 years old, and I was sister and mother to him both. Poor little lad, he was never strong, and he died when he wasn't much over 20. Seems to me I'd have given him anything on earth, Ann dearie, if he had only lived. Miss Cornelia sighed. Gilbert had gone down, and Leslie, who had been crooning over the small James Matthew in the dormer window, laid him asleep in his basket and went her way. As soon as she was safely out of earshot, Miss Cornelia bent forward and said in a conspirator's whisper, Ann dearie, I'd a letter from Owen Ford yesterday. He's in Vancouver just now. He wants to know if I can board him for a month later on. You know what that means. Well, I hope we're doing right. We've nothing to do with it. We couldn't prevent him from coming to Four Winds if he wanted to, said Anne quickly. She did not like the feeling of matchmaking Miss Cornelia's whispers gave her, and then she weakly succumbed herself. Don't let Leslie know he's coming until he's here, she said. If she found out, I feel sure she would go away at once. She intends to go in the fall anyhow. She told me so the other day. She's going to Montreal to take up nursing and make what she can of her life. Oh, well, Ann dearie, said Miss Cornelia, nodding sagely. That is all as it may be. You and I have done our part. We must leave the rest to higher hands. Chapter 35. Politics at Four Winds. When Anne came downstairs again, the island, as well as all of Canada, was in the throes of a campaign preceding a general election. Gilbert, who was an ardent conservative, found himself caught in the vortex, being much in demand for speech-making at the various country rallies. Miss Cornelia did not approve of his mixing up in politics and told Anne so. Dr. Dave never did it. Dr. Blythe will find he is making a mistake, believe me. Politics is something no decent man should meddle with. Is the government of the country to be left solely to the rogues, then? Asked Anne. Yes, so long as it's conservative rogues, said Miss Cornelia, marching off with the honors of war. Men and politicians are all tarred with the same brush. The Grits have it laid on thicker than the Conservatives, that's all, considerably thicker. But Grit or Tory, my advice to Dr. Blythe is to steer clear of politics. First thing you know, he'll be running an election himself and going off to Ottawa for half the year and leaving his practice to the dogs. Ah, well, let's not borrow trouble, said Anne. The rate of interest is too high. Instead, he looks a little gem. It should be spelled with a G. He isn't perfectly beautiful. Just see the dimples in his elbows. We'll bring him up to be a good conservative, you and I, Miss Cornelia. Bring him up to be a good man, said Miss Cornelia, because they're scarce and valuable. Though, mind you, I wouldn't like to see him a Grit. As for the election, you and I may be thankful we don't live over harbor. The air there is blue these days. Every Elliott and Crawford and McAllister is on the warpath, loaded for bear. This side is peaceful and calm, seeing there's so few men. Captain Jim's a Grit, but it's my opinion he's ashamed of it, for he never talks politics. There isn't any earthly doubt that the Conservatives will be returned with the big majority again. Miss Cornelia was mistaken. On the morning after the election, Captain Jim dropped in at the little house to tell the news. So virulent is the microbe of party politics, even in a peaceful old man, that Captain Jim's cheeks were flushed and his eyes were flashing with all his old-time fire. Mistress Blythe, the Liberals are in with a sweeping majority. After 18 years of Tory mismanagement, this downtrodden country is going to have a chance at last. I never heard you make such a bitter partisan speech before, Captain Jim. I didn't think you had so much political venom in you," laughed Anne, who was not much excited over the tidings. Little Jim had said "woga" that morning. What were principalities and powers, the rise and fall of dynasties, the overthrow of Grit or Tory, compared with that miraculous occurrence? "It's been accumulating for a long time," said Captain Jim with a depreciating smile. "I thought I was only a moderate Grit, but when the news came that we were in, I found out just how gritty I really was. You know, the doctor and I are conservatives." "Oh, well, it's the only bad thing I know of either of you, Mistress Blythe. Cornelia is a Tory, too. I called in on my way from the Glen to tell her the news." "Didn't you know you took your life in your hands?" "Yes, but I couldn't resist the temptation." "Well, how did she take it?" "Comparatively calm, Mistress Blythe, comparatively calm. She says she, well, Providence sends seasons of humiliation to a country, same as to individuals. You Grits have been cold and hungry for many a year. Make haste to get warmed and fed, for you won't be in long. Well, now, Cornelia, I says, maybe Providence thinks Canada needs a real long spell of humiliation. Ah, Susan, have you heard the news? The Liberals are in." Susan had just come in from the kitchen, attended by the odor of delectable dishes, which always seemed to hover around her. "Now, are they?" she said, with beautiful unconcern. "Well, I never could see but that my bread rose just as light when Grits were in as when they were not. And if any party, Mrs. Doctor dear, will make it rain before the week is out, and save our kitchen garden from entire ruination, that is the party Susan will vote for. In the meantime, will you just step out and give me your opinion on the meat for dinner? I'm fearing that it is very tough, and I think that we'd better change our butcher as well as our government." One evening, a week later, Anne walked down to the point to see if she could get some fresh fish from Captain Jim, leaving little Jim for the first time. It was quite a tragedy. Suppose, he cried, suppose Susan did not know just exactly what to do for him. Susan was calm and serene. "I have had as much experience with him as you, Mrs. Doctor dear, have I not?" "Yes, with him, but not with other babies. Why, I looked after 3 pairs of twins when I was a child, Susan. When they cried, I gave them peppermint or castor oil quite coolly. It's quite curious now to recall how lightly I took all those babies and their woes." "Oh, well, if little Jim cries, I'll just clap a hot water bag on his little stomach," said Susan. "Not too hot, you know," said Anne anxiously. "Oh, was it really wise to go?" "Do not you fret, Mrs. Doctor dear. Susan is not the woman to burn a wee man. Bless him, he has no notion of crying." Anne tore herself away finally and enjoyed her walk to the point after all. Through the long shadows of the sun setting, Captain Jim was not in the living room of the lighthouse, but another man was. A handsome, middle-aged man with a strong, clean-shaven chin, who was unknown to Anne. Nevertheless, when she sat down, he began to talk to her with all the assurance of an old acquaintance. There was nothing amiss in what he said or the way he said it, but Anne rather resented such a cool taking for granted in a complete stranger. Her replies were frosty and as few as decency required. Nothing daunted, her companion talked on for several minutes, then excused himself and went away. Anne could have sworn there was a twinkle in his eye, and it annoyed her. Who was this creature? There was something vaguely familiar about him, but she was certain she had never seen him before. "Captain Jim, who was that who just went out?" she asked as Captain Jim came in. "Marshall Elliott," answered the captain. "Marshall Elliott!" cried Anne. "Oh, Captain Jim, it wasn't—" "Yes, it was, his voice. Oh, Captain Jim, I didn't know him, and I was quite insulting to him. Why didn't he tell me? He must have seen that I didn't know him." "He wouldn't say a word about it. He would just enjoy the joke. Don't worry over snubbing him. He'll think it fun. Yes, Marshall shaved off his beard at last and cut his hair. His party is in, you know. I didn't know him myself first time I saw him. He was up in Carter Flagg's store at the Glen the night after Election Day, along with a crowd of others, waiting for the news, and about 12 the phone came through. The Liberals were in. Marshall just got up and walked out. He didn't cheer or shout. He let the others do that, and they nearly lifted the roof off of Carter's store. I reckon, of course, all the Tories were over in Raymond Russell's store. Not much cheering there. Marshall went straight down the street to the side door of Augustus Palmer's barber shop. Augustus was in bed asleep, but Marshall hammered on the door until he got up and came down, wanting to know what all the racket was about. "Come into your shop and do your best job you've ever done in your life, Gus," said Marshall. "The Liberals are in, and you're going to barber a good grit before the sun rises." Gus was mad as hops, partly because he'd been dragged out of bed, but more because he's a Tory. He vowed he wouldn't shave any man after 12 at night. "You'll do what I want you to do, Sonny," said Marshall, "or I'll just turn you over my knee and give you one of those spankings your mother forgot." He'd have done it too, and Gus knew it, for Marshall is as strong as an ox and Gus is only a midget of a man. So he gave in and towed Marshall into the shop and went to work. "Now," says he, "I'll barber you up. But if you say one word to me about the grits getting in while I'm doing, I'll cut your throat with this razor," says he. You wouldn't have thought that mild little Gus could be so bloodthirsty, would you? Shows what party politics will do to a man. Marshall kept quiet and got his hair and beard disposed of and went home. When his old housekeeper heard him come upstairs, she peeked out of her bedroom door to see whether 'twas him or the hired boy, and when she saw a strange man striding down the hall with a candle in his hand, she screamed blue murder and fainted dead away. They had to send for the doctor before they could bring her to, and it was several days before she could look at Marshall without shaking all over. Captain Jim had no fish. He seldom went out in his boat that summer, and his long tampering expeditions were over. He spent a great deal of his time sitting by his seawood window, looking out over the Gulf with his swiftly whitening head leaning on his hand. He sat there tonight for many silent minutes, keeping some tryst with the past which Anne could not disturb. Presently he pointed to the iris of the west. "That's beautiful, isn't it, Mistress Blythe? But I wish you could have seen the sunrise this morning. It was a wonderful thing, just wonderful." "I've seen all kinds of sunrises come over that gulf. I've been all over the world, Mistress Blythe, and I've taken it all in. But I've never seen a finer sight than that summer sunrise over the gulf. A man can't pick his time for dying, Mistress Blythe. Just got to go when the great captain gives his sailing orders. But if I could, I'd go when the morning comes across the water. I've watched it many a time and thought what a thing it would be to pass out through that great white glory to whatever was waiting beyond on the sea that ain't mapped out on an earthly chart. Think, Mistress Blythe, that I'd find my lost Margaret there?" Captain Jim had often talked to Anne of lost Margaret since he had told her the old story. His love for her trembled in every tone, that love that had never grown faint or forgetful. "Anyway, I hope when my time comes I'll go quick and easy. I don't think I'm a coward, Mistress Blythe. I've looked an ugly death in the face more than once without blenching, but the thought of a lingering death does give me a queer, sick feeling of horror." "Don't talk about leaving us, dear Captain Jim," pleaded Anne in a choked voice, patting the old brown hand once so strong but now grown very feeble. "What would we do without you?" Captain Jim just smiled beautifully. "Oh, you'd get along nicely. But you wouldn't forget the old man altogether, Mistress Blythe. No, I don't think you'll ever quite forget him. The race of Joseph always remembers one another. But it'll be a memory that won't hurt. I'd like to think that my memory won't hurt my friends. It'll always be kind of pleasant to them. At least I hope and believe. It won't be very long now before lost Margaret calls me, for the last time, and I'll be ready to answer. I just spoke of this because there's a little favor I want to ask you. Here's this poor old matey of mine, Captain Jim reached out a hand and poked the big, warm, velvety golden ball on the sofa. The first mate uncoiled himself like a spring with a nice, throaty, comfortable sound, half purr, half meow, stretched his paws in air, turning over, and coiled himself up again. He'll miss me when I start on that long voyage, and I can't bear to think of leaving the poor critter to starve, like he was left before. If anything happens to me, will you give matey a bite and a corner, Mistress Blythe? Indeed I will. Then that is all I had on my mind. Your little Jim is to have the few curious things I picked up. I've seen to that. And now I don't like to see tears in those pretty eyes, Mistress Blythe. I maybe hang on for quite a spell yet. I heard you reading a piece of poetry one day last winter. One of the Tennyson's pieces. I'd sort of like to hear it again, if you could recite it for me. Softly and clearly, while the sea wind blew in on them, Anne repeated the beautiful lines of Tennyson's wonderful swan song, Crossing the Bar. The old captain kept time gently with his sinewy hand. Yes, yes, Mistress Blythe, he said when she had finished. That's it. That's it. He wasn't a sailor, you tell me. I don't know how he could have put on an old sailor's feelings into words like that, if he wasn't one. He didn't want any sadness or farewells, and neither do I, Mistress Blythe, for all will be well with me, and mine beyond the bar. Well, gosh, that's a little sad to end on. All right. Well, thank you for joining me for these 2 chapters. I hope you will join me next time as we continue this beautiful storybook adventure with Anne of Green Gables and book number 5, Anne's House of Dreams. Until next time, be joyful, be the joy in everything you do, and live your joy. And I'll see you next time. Bye.